quickly!
Battle stations, prepare for engagement!
January 1943. A cold wind whispers across the surface of a Japanese harbor, where docked ships lie quietly under dim lanterns. The night is still, almost deafening, save for the occasional creak of a mooring line or the distant call of a night bird. Officers pace along the piers, confident in the harbor's layered defenses, anti-submarine nets, patrolling torpedo boats, and lookout towers scanning the waters. They believe themselves untouchable. Beneath the surface, something moves, silent, deliberate. A submarine glides through the dark waters, cutting across the imagined safety of this fortress. No lights, no warning. The crew holds its breath, every motion calculated, every instrument monitored. Above, Japanese officers lean over the railing, unaware of the shadow creeping closer to their ships. Suddenly, the submarine surfaces just yards from the docked vessels. The sudden appearance sends officers stumbling back, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Weapons are scrambled, alarms blare, and the reality sinks in. The inviolable harbor has been penetrated. Shock ripples through every officer, a disbelief that will haunt their decisions in the days to come. In that instant, the rules of engagement shift, and the Pacific War reveals a new, terrifying vulnerability. By late 1941, the Pacific Ocean had become the arena for one of the most ambitious and deadly naval campaigns in history. Japan, having swiftly expanded its reach across Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific, appeared untouchable. Its naval forces, centered on the formidable Imperial Japanese Navy, dominated the seas with battleships, aircraft carriers, and a sprawling network of fortified harbors. Cities like Truk, Rabaul, and Manila were transformed into strategic strongholds, housing fleets, supply depots, and essential shipping lanes. Commanders believed these harbors, shielded by anti-submarine nets, minefields, and patrol boats, were impregnable. Yet, beneath this veneer of security, the Allies were quietly recalibrating their approach. The United States Navy, reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor, had begun to embrace a strategy that leveraged stealth, intelligence, and technology over sheer firepower. Submarines, once largely defensive or scouting vessels, were now reimagined as precision instruments capable of striking deep into enemy territory. The Pacific's vast distances, coupled with Japanese overconfidence, created an opening the Allies were eager to exploit. Submarine design had evolved rapidly in the years preceding the war. The Gado-class and Tambor-class vessels were engineered for endurance and stealth. They could traverse thousands of miles without refueling, maintain near-complete silence while submerged, and deliver torpedoes with deadly accuracy. These innovations made the idea of penetrating enemy harbors no longer theoretical, but a feasible, albeit daring, tactic. Crews trained relentlessly for these operations, practicing silent approaches, navigation through narrow channels, and rapid surfacing to maximize surprise. Intelligence played an equally pivotal role. Allied codebreakers had begun to crack Japanese naval codes, revealing shipping schedules, harbor layouts, and defensive protocols. Each intercepted message, each decoded report, was a piece of the puzzle. The Allies could plan attacks with precision that the Japanese could not anticipate. This convergence of stealth technology, skilled crews, and intelligence gathering laid the groundwork for missions that would leave Japanese officers reeling. By early 1942, the Pacific War had entered a dangerous new phase. Japanese victories across Malaya, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies had given them a false sense of security. Harbor defenses were designed to stop conventional attacks, mines, patrol boats, and netting, but they had not anticipated an enemy that could strike unseen beneath the waterline and emerge unexpectedly. Commanders focused on surface threats and air attacks, rarely considering that submarines could slip inside their own ports and directly threaten anchored ships. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge assumptions about naval dominance. The Pacific was a vast, unpredictable battlefield, and the Japanese Navy, though powerful, had not yet faced the full capabilities of Allied submarine warfare. In this environment, a single daring operation could ripple across the entire theater, shattering confidence and forcing a reevaluation of strategy. The psychological element was just as critical as the physical threat. Japanese officers had been trained to expect certain patterns of engagement. Enemy vessels were supposed to appear at predictable times, and harbors were thought to be safe zones. The intrusion of a submarine into a secure harbor would not only threaten material assets, but also erode trust in leadership and defensive planning. The shock of such an operation would resonate far beyond the immediate damage, shaking the morale of men who believed themselves untouchable. It was within this complex network of power, technology, and human psychology that the daring submarine raids began to take shape. The Pacific War had revealed that dominance at sea required more than numbers. It demanded ingenuity, precision, and the willingness to exploit enemy assumptions. As Allied submarines prepared to slip silently into the heart of Japanese harbors, the stage was set for moments that would shock, confuse, and fundamentally alter the course of the conflict. While Japanese officers focused on maintaining visible control of their harbors, the Allies quietly mapped every channel, dock, and defensive position. Reconnaissance planes, submarine patrols, and intelligence networks gathered critical data. Aerial photographs revealed harbor layouts, positions of anchored vessels, and gaps in anti-submarine netting. Underwater charts highlighted the depth of channels and potential navigation hazards. Every detail became part of a meticulous plan designed to exploit vulnerabilities that Japanese commanders believed were non-existent. The Japanese defensive mindset had a key flaw. It prioritized conventional threats. Patrol boats circled the perimeter of harbors. Torpedo nets lined key entrances, and watchtowers scanned for enemy aircraft. However, the possibility of submarine infiltrating these strongholds was rarely considered. Depth charges were primarily positioned for encounters with approaching vessels outside the harbor, not for threats lurking silently beneath the docks. Japanese officers assumed that any aggressive move by the enemy would announce itself through sonar detection or periscope sightings, signals that the Allies had learned to avoid. Submarine crews trained specifically for these high-risk harbor operations. They practiced silent approaches under near-total darkness, adjusting for tides, currents, and underwater obstacles. Communication within the vessel was minimized to reduce noise, and crew members learned to interpret every instrument reading with precision. Navigation charts were memorized, and contingency plans were drilled repeatedly. The goal was clear: enter undetected, position the submarine optimally, and strike before the enemy could react. Technological advantages were decisive. Submarines were equipped with advanced sonar-evading hulls, electric motors for near-silent movement, and torpedoes calibrated for precise strikes against anchored vessels. Night vision and periscopes allowed crews to gauge distances and target placement without surfacing fully. The combination of technology and training meant that a well-executed harbor infiltration could occur without warning, catching Japanese officers in a moment of complete surprise. Allied intelligence continued to feed this strategy. Intercepted Japanese communications revealed when ships would dock, which vessels were loaded with supplies, and the rotation of patrols. Each piece of information increased the probability of a successful operation. Crews rehearsed the infiltration, timing their approach to exploit shifts in tides and patrol schedules. By synchronizing technology, intelligence, and human skill, the Allies transformed an audacious idea into a feasible military tactic. Meanwhile, Japanese officers maintained a false sense of security. Harbor defenses gave the appearance of invulnerability, reinforcing the belief that the Pacific was firmly under their control. Commanders expected attacks to follow predictable patterns, from the air, at open sea, or along supply routes. They could not fathom that the enemy would take the enormous risk of sending submarines into the very heart of their strongholds. This overconfidence would become the Achilles heel that Allied planners sought to exploit. The stage for dramatic confrontation was now complete. Submarines lay in wait, hidden by the night and the vastness of the Pacific, while Japanese officers carried on with routine inspections and patrols. Every step, every calculation, and every piece of intelligence was aimed at a single objective, proving that no harbor was truly untouchable. The coming raids would test not only the limits of technology and strategy, but also the nerve and adaptability of men on both sides. As the Allies prepared their daring incursions, Japanese officers remained unaware that their assumptions about security and control were about to be shattered. What they believed impossible was about to become reality, an event that would redefine the stakes of naval warfare in the Pacific. In a quiet harbor, Japanese officers prided themselves on control. Their routines were disciplined, their expectations rigid. But the sudden emergence of a submarine inside their supposedly secure waters shattered that certainty. Panic rippled through the command ranks. Officers scrambled to sound alarms, their training inadequate for this unprecedented threat. Sailors abandoned routine inspections, some freezing mid-step, unable to comprehend how an enemy vessel had bypassed every defensive measure. Shock became a palpable force, more dangerous than any torpedo. It left officers questioning not just their strategy, but their own judgment. Fear, unfamiliar and unnerving, replaced the calm confidence that had guided their careers. The human element extended beyond the officers. Dock workers, engineers, and sailors witnessed the impossible unfold before their eyes. Some hid in shadows, some attempted to man anti-submarine defenses, and others simply stared, paralyzed by disbelief. This moment of chaos magnified the effectiveness of the submarine raid. By exploiting the psychological fragility of supposedly invincible force, the Allies demonstrated that warfare was not only about firepower. It was about manipulating perception, timing, and expectation. The operation's success relied on a precise understanding of Japanese harbor defenses. Submarines navigated narrow channels, avoiding detection by patrol boats and searchlights. Timing was critical. Tidal patterns determined whether a vessel could approach without grounding or generating noise. Crews had to calculate every movement, ensuring that the submarine remained submerged until the final moments. Anti-submarine nets, often thought impenetrable, were bypassed through gaps, weak points, or innovative maneuvers. The tactical brilliance lay in exploiting overconfidence. Japanese commanders relied on predictable patrol patterns, assuming that any enemy incursion would follow conventional approaches. The Allies turned this assumption against them by entering the harbor silently at night, and at precise angles, submarines transformed a routine defensive space into a vulnerability. The operation demonstrated that intelligence, planning, and audacity could outweigh numerical superiority. The submarines used in these daring raids represented the cutting edge of naval technology. Electric motors allowed near-silent movement, preventing detection by surface vessels. Hulls were reinforced for deep submersion while maintaining agility in tight channels. Torpedoes were equipped with advanced detonators, capable of striking stationary or moving targets with high accuracy. Periscopes and early sonar provided real-time navigation feedback, allowing crews to avoid obstacles while remaining unseen. Technology alone, however, was insufficient without skilled crews. Every system required precise operation. Every instrument reading could mean the difference between mission success or failure. The blend of human skill and technological advancement allowed these submarines to perform feats that, to the Japanese officers on the surface, seemed impossible. The visual of a vessel emerging silently in the heart of a defended harbor became a symbol of innovation's capacity to disrupt the established order. Japanese leadership faced an unprecedented dilemma. Officers had to make immediate choices under conditions for which they were unprepared. Orders were given hastily, some contradictory, as panic undermined standard protocols. Commanders struggled to coordinate anti-submarine defenses that were never intended to face an intruder within the harbor. This failure highlighted a critical aspect of warfare. Rigid hierarchical systems, when confronted with novel threats, can become paralyzed. Conversely, Allied commanders demonstrated decisive planning and trust in their crews. Missions were carefully coordinated, risks calculated, and contingencies prepared. Leadership, in this case, was not about issuing commands from the surface. It was about empowering trained teams to act autonomously in high-stakes environments. The contrast in leadership philosophies, rigid versus adaptive, directly influenced the outcome of these raids. From the Allied perspective, these submarine raids were calculated acts of strategic disruption. Commanders understood that Japanese naval dominance depended as much on perception as on firepower. By infiltrating harbors, they could strike at the heart of the enemy's confidence, forcing commanders to rethink every assumption about security. Each mission was meticulously planned using intelligence, reconnaissance, and technological innovation. Crews were briefed on patrol schedules, docked vessel positions, and tidal conditions, allowing them to exploit weaknesses with precision. The daring nature of these operations also reflected a broader Allied mindset. Risk was acceptable if the potential payoff was decisive. Unlike Japanese officers, whose focus remained on conventional defense, Allied commanders embraced unpredictability. Harbor infiltrations were high risk, but their psychological and strategic impact far outweighed the dangers. Every successful penetration signaled to the Japanese that no place was beyond reach, reshaping the operational landscape of the Pacific. The intrusion of submarines into supposedly secure harbors had profound psychological consequences. Shock and disbelief were immediate, but lingering fear reshaped Japanese naval culture. Officers became hesitant to trust routine intelligence, second-guessing their own judgments and the reliability of their defenses. Morale among crews suffered. The illusion of invulnerability had been shattered. These psychological wounds, though invisible, were as damaging as any physical loss. For Allied crews, the moral calculus was different, but no less intense. Men faced the constant danger of detection, depth charges, and enemy countermeasures. The stakes were clear. Failure often meant death. Success meant a blow that could change the trajectory of the war. The weight of responsibility created tension aboard every submarine, where silence was both a shield and a crucible. This balance between human fear and professional duty defined the character of the campaign. These raids also challenged deeply ingrained cultural assumptions within the Japanese Navy. Tradition emphasized honor, discipline, and adherence to protocol. Harbor defenses were a matter of pride, and the ability to repel an enemy was equated with professional competence. A submarine slipping unnoticed into these spaces was not just a tactical failure. It was a symbolic humiliation. Officers confronted the reality that the enemy could exploit weaknesses they had never imagined, forcing a reckoning with both strategy and ethos. The Allies, by contrast, approached these missions pragmatically. Success was measured in results, not in the preservation of honor or adherence to expectation. This cultural divergence amplified the impact of the raids. Where the Japanese perceived a blow to prestige, the Allies saw validation of careful planning, innovation, and audacity. The clash of cultural perspectives became a hidden battlefield, shaping reactions long after the submarines had departed. Finally, these operations had immediate operational implications. Harbors once considered secure were now potential battlegrounds. Japanese commanders were forced to divert resources, increase patrols, and reconsider the placement of ships and supplies. Anti-submarine nets, depth charge deployment, and lookout rotations were all reevaluated, often at significant logistical cost. The success of a single penetration required a wholesale reconsideration of naval defense, illustrating the disproportionate effect a small, well-coordinated force could have on a much larger adversary. These angles collectively reveal the multi-layered impact of submarine harbor raids. They were not simply acts of destruction. They were demonstrations of ingenuity, psychological warfare, and cultural confrontation. Every perspective, human, technological, tactical, leadership, enemy, moral, and operational, intertwined to create a moment that challenged assumptions and reshaped strategy. The convergence of these factors set the stage for the decisive actions to come. Japanese officers, grappling with fear, disbelief, and disrupted command structures, faced the imminent reality of a turning point in the Pacific War. The next phase, the climax, would transform tension into direct confrontation, determining the immediate outcome of these audacious raids. March 1943. The harbor of Truk Lagoon, often called the Gibraltar of the Pacific, was a sprawling naval stronghold for the Japanese fleet. Its calm waters reflected the lights of anchored warships, cruisers, destroyers, and supply vessels, while the officers on the piers moved with routine precision. Security seemed absolute. Anti-submarine nets lined the channel entrances, patrol boats circled at regular intervals, and watchtowers scanned every inch of the water. Yet, beneath the surface, a small fleet of American submarines approached, unseen, unheard, and methodical. The first submarine, a Gato-class vessel, slipped silently beneath the waves. The crew had memorized every contour of the harbor floor, every pier, and every moored ship. Tension was almost tactile. A single misstep could expose them to depth charges or artillery fire. Instruments flickered in the dim light of the control room as the captain calculated depth and speed. Outside, the night appeared calm, but inside the submarine, every man felt the weight of history pressing down. This was no routine patrol. This was an infiltration that could redefine the Pacific theater. As the submarine advanced, Japanese officers on the piers carried on with inspections, unaware of the shadow gliding beneath their fleet. Suddenly, a periscope broke the water's surface near a moored cruiser. An officer glimpsed it and froze, but the moment passed too quickly to comprehend. Within minutes, the submarine surfaced mere yards from the docked vessels. The sudden emergence of a foreign warship in their inner harbor ignited chaos. Alarm bells rang, guns were manned, and officers shouted orders that were already too late to organize a coherent defense. The American crew wasted no time. Torpedoes were loaded and aimed at key targets, supply ships essential for sustaining Japanese operations across the Pacific. Calculations had been exact. Angles, distances, and timing had been rehearsed countless times. Within moments, torpedoes sliced through the water, striking their marks. Explosions rocked the harbor, sending plumes of fire and smoke into the night sky. Sailors were thrown from decks, equipment splintered, and chaos consumed the once orderly harbor. Panic spread among Japanese officers. Some tried to coordinate counterattacks with depth charges. Others attempted to rally crews to man anti-submarine nets. Yet the intruding submarines were already maneuvering to secondary positions, surfacing briefly to fire again before slipping back beneath the waves. The harbor, once a symbol of security and control, had transformed into a battlefield of confusion, fear, and destruction. The timing and precision of the operation left Japanese leadership reeling. Reports were contradictory. Some officers claimed multiple submarines had entered simultaneously, while others insisted it was a single, inexplicable intruder. Communication lines became congested with urgent orders, many impossible to execute. Within a single hour, the psychological and physical impact of the raid shattered confidence. Officers questioned their training, their assumptions, and their ability to defend even the most fortified positions. Amid the chaos, smaller engagements unfolded. Patrol boats attempted to ram the intruding submarines, only to miss or strike nothing. Depth charges were launched in desperation, often detonating harmlessly in open water. The Allies, anticipating such reactions, had calculated these contingencies. Each failed countermeasure amplified the terror aboard the docks. What had begun as a precise tactical maneuver became a demonstration of dominance, showing that careful planning, courage, and innovation could overcome overwhelming defenses. This first strike marked the turning point of the harbor operations. Japanese officers, who had considered their naval strongholds impregnable, faced undeniable proof that vulnerability existed in places they had never imagined. The meticulous training and technological advantage of the Allied submarines had rewritten the rules of engagement, forcing the Japanese Navy to confront an enemy capable of reaching them in the heart of their own territory. The success of the initial infiltration set the stage for continued strikes and further escalations. Japanese defenses were reactive, improvised, and ultimately insufficient. The calm of the Pacific night had been shattered, replaced by a sense of imminent threat. From a perspective of Allied commanders, the operation validated months of preparation, intelligence gathering, and calculated risk-taking. The stage was set for the second wave of decisive actions, where the full impact of these daring raids would be realized. Elegance and prior experience. The Japanese, shaken by the previous night's chaos, scrambled patrols and repositioned ships, but their reactions were slow, fragmented, and increasingly desperate. As the submarines entered the harbor, officers observed anomalies they could not immediately explain. Shadows moved in impossible directions, ripples in the water suggested activity beneath the surface, and the once predictable patrol routes appeared compromised. The commanding officers attempted to direct countermeasures, issuing orders to depth-charge teams and deploying nets, yet confusion dominated the scene. The psychological pressure of knowing that unseen enemies were operating within yards of their fleet had paralyzed decision-making. Explosions erupted again, targeting key supply vessels and auxiliary ships essential for Japanese operations across the Pacific. Fires spread rapidly along wooden docks, smoke billowing into the sky and silhouetting the frantic figures of sailors rushing to save what they could. Officers barked orders in vain, their voices drowned by the cacophony of chaos. The carefully rehearsed training routines collapsed under the weight of an enemy they could neither see nor predict. In the control rooms of the submarines, crews executed the plan with disciplined efficiency. Torpedoes were reloaded and fired at critical points. Communication was minimal, and each captain made rapid, autonomous decisions based on evolving conditions. They moved like shadows, surfacing briefly to strike before submerging again, leaving Japanese forces struggling to react. The combination of stealth, speed, and coordinated aggression amplified the impact of the operation far beyond its numerical scale. Japanese officers attempted desperate improvisation. Patrol boats were redeployed, searchlights swung frantically across the water, and anti-submarine nets were manually adjusted. Yet every measure came too late. The intruding submarines had already achieved tactical positions that Japanese defenses could not reach in time. Confusion reigned as contradictory reports flooded the command lines. Some officers insisted multiple submarines had infiltrated simultaneously, Others believed it was a coordinated surface attack disguised by darkness. The inability to grasp the nature of the threat compounded the damage, both materially and psychologically. By the early hours of the morning, the harbor was a scene of devastation. Dozens of ships had been damaged or sunk, fires consumed portions of the docks, and communications remained intermittent. Japanese officers faced the grim reality. A single night had undone years of strategic planning, and the illusion of harbor invulnerability had been irrevocably broken. Morale sank as men realized that their most secure strongholds could be penetrated with precision and audacity. For the Allied forces, the operation was a textbook success. Objectives had been met with minimal exposure, critical enemy vessels had been neutralized, and the psychological impact on Japanese leadership was profound. The raids demonstrated the lethal combination of intelligence, innovation, and audacity. The Allies had forced the enemy to confront not only physical losses, but also the vulnerability of their command structures, the inadequacy of prior defensive assumptions, and the possibility of continued harassment in the very heart of their territory. The events of these nights marked a pivotal turning point in Pacific naval warfare. Japanese officers, once confident in their harbors, now faced a new reality. The Allies could reach them anywhere, even in spaces previously considered safe. This realization would ripple through subsequent naval strategy, forcing a reevaluation of patrol protocols, defensive measures, and fleet deployment. The raid was more than a tactical success. It was a psychological blow, a challenge to assumptions, and a demonstration that ingenuity and preparation could overcome even the most formidable defenses. The stage was now set for the aftermath, the tangible losses, the strategic consequences, and the long-term shift in Japanese naval thinking. What began as a daring infiltration had evolved into a decisive turning point, reshaping the Pacific theater and proving that no harbor, however fortified, was immune to the reach of modern submarine warfare. The morning after the raids, Truk Lagoon was a scene of quiet devastation. Smoke lingered over the harbor, punctuated by the occasional flicker of remaining fires. Dozens of ships, supply vessels, auxiliaries, and smaller warships had been damaged or sunk. The once imposing naval stronghold appeared vulnerable, its docks scarred by explosions and debris. Japanese officers walked among the wreckage, their faces etched with disbelief. For many, the shock of seeing an enemy submarine in the heart of a supposedly secure harbor would linger far longer than the material losses. Casualty reports trickled in slowly. Sailors had been thrown from decks or trapped by collapsing structures. Estimates indicated dozens killed or injured, though the chaos made immediate accounting difficult. Beyond the human toll, the destruction of vital supplies had immediate operational consequences. Ships carrying ammunition, fuel, and provisions for far-flung garrisons were destroyed or rendered inoperative. The raids disrupted supply chains, delaying reinforcements and weakening the Japanese Navy's ability to project power across the Pacific. The psychological impact on Japanese officers was profound. The belief in the invulnerability of their harbors, a confidence nurtured through months of planning and a culture of discipline, had been shattered. Reports from command meetings reveal a mixture of panic, blame, and incredulity. Officers questioned prior assessments, defensive protocols, and even the competence of their subordinates. One senior officer reportedly described the events as beyond comprehension, capturing the disbelief that gripped the command structure. Allied forces, meanwhile, celebrated a quiet but decisive victory. The submarines had returned to base largely unscathed, their crews lauded for precision, discipline, and courage. The raids validated months of planning, intelligence gathering, and training. They also sent a clear strategic message. No harbor, however fortified, was immune to infiltration. The success of the operations went beyond physical destruction. It was a demonstration of reach, ingenuity, and psychological dominance. Reports sent to higher command emphasized both material and morale effects. Japanese communication logs noted increased caution, a reevaluation of harbor defenses, and a pervasive fear that further attacks could occur at any time. The attacks forced the Imperial Japanese Navy to consider new defensive measures, redeployment of patrols, reinforcement of anti-submarine nets, and stricter protocols for anchoring and docking vessels. Each response required resources that could have been used elsewhere, creating a ripple effect across the broader theater of operations. In the weeks following the raids, intelligence continued to play a critical role. Intercepted communications showed Japanese officers obsessively reviewing patrol patterns and defensive layouts, attempting to understand how such audacious infiltrations have been possible. The raids had accomplished what conventional naval engagements often could not. They forced the enemy to confront vulnerabilities that were invisible under peacetime assumptions. The human cost, strategic impact, and psychological shock of these raids intertwined to reshape the Pacific naval campaign. Japanese officers, previously confident in their operational control, now faced a persistent and unpredictable threat. Morale was fragile, resources were stretched, and defensive doctrines required urgent adaptation. For the Allies, the operation was a template for future actions, a demonstration that precision, stealth, and audacity could achieve disproportionate results. The full consequences of these raids were only beginning to unfold. Japanese officers would spend months adjusting defensive measures, re-evaluating command decisions, and managing the lingering fear that another submarine could strike again at any moment. The harbor, once considered untouchable, had been proven vulnerable, and the psychological lessons of this operation would echo throughout the Pacific War. In the weeks and months following the harbor raids, the Imperial Japanese Navy confronted a stark reality. Their harbors were no longer sanctuaries. Commanders issued urgent directives to strengthen defenses, but the psychological imprint of the infiltrations lingered far longer than the material repairs. Patrol schedules were intensified, anti-submarine nets reinforced, and depth charges repositioned in anticipation of further attacks. Yet no amount of preparation could entirely erase the memory of submarines moving undetected among anchored fleets, striking without warning and vanishing as silently as they had appeared. Strategically, the raids forced a reassessment of naval priorities. Japanese officers realized that the allocation of resources had to shift from purely offensive operations to defensive vigilance. Ships that might have been used for broader Pacific campaigns were kept closer to home ports. Supply convoys required additional escort vessels, stretching the Navy's already taxed fleet. Every adjustment represented a compromise, a concession to a new and unsettling form of warfare that threatened not only ships, but confidence itself. The broader operational consequences were equally significant. Allied commanders, having proven the effectiveness of harbor infiltrations, gained a powerful tool for shaping enemy behavior. The psychological advantage shifted decisively. Japanese officers now operated under the constant shadow of potential submarine intrusion. The mere possibility of such attacks disrupted planning, delayed operations, and introduced an element of uncertainty that the Allies exploited relentlessly. Submarine crews continued to patrol strategic harbors, maintaining pressure while Japanese forces struggled to adapt. Morale among Japanese sailors also suffered. The raids had demonstrated that training, discipline, and careful planning could be rendered ineffective by ingenuity and stealth. Officers reported unease among crews, a heightened sense of vulnerability, and an increased reluctance to follow standard routines without intense oversight. This erosion of confidence had lasting consequences, affecting both operational readiness and the ability to respond decisively to future engagements. From a historical perspective, these raids marked a turning point in naval warfare. They illustrated that dominance at sea was no longer solely determined by the number of ships or firepower, but by adaptability, intelligence, and the capacity to strike unexpectedly. The Pacific theater had become a proving ground for new concepts in naval strategy, where the audacity of small, well-trained forces could challenge the assumptions of even the most formidable adversaries. Japanese naval doctrine evolved in response. Harbors were no longer considered passive defensive zones. They became dynamic battlefields requiring constant monitoring and rapid response capabilities. The emphasis shifted toward early detection, technological adaptation, and flexible command structures capable of responding to unconventional threats. In essence, the raids forced a cultural as well as strategic transformation, challenging officers to balance honor, tradition, and tactical necessity in a rapidly changing theater of war. For the Allies, the success of these operations reinforced the value of combining technology, intelligence, and human skill. Submarine crews had achieved results far beyond what conventional fleet actions could accomplish. The raids became case studies in operational excellence, demonstrating that precise, calculated risks could yield disproportionate results. Moreover, the psychological impact on Japanese officers, fear, uncertainty, and the erosion of confidence, underscored the importance of targeting not just material assets, but the perception and morale of the enemy. By the end of 1943, the lessons of these daring infiltrations had reshaped Pacific naval operations. Japanese officers, once confident in the invulnerability of their harbors, now operated with caution, constantly aware that a single mistake could be catastrophic. Harbors, supply chains, and defensive routines had all been forced to adapt. The raids had achieved what few conventional battles could. They had rewritten assumptions, reshaped strategy, and demonstrated that the balance of power was as much psychological as it was physical. As these realities settled in, both sides understood a fundamental truth. In modern naval warfare, even the most fortified positions could be challenged by intelligence, ingenuity, and daring. The stage was now set for reflection, an understanding of what these events meant not only for the Pacific War, but for the evolution of naval strategy and the human cost of warfare. The submarine raids on Japanese harbors were more than isolated tactical victories. They were a revelation in the art of naval warfare. They exposed the fragility of assumptions, showing that even the most fortified ports were vulnerable to ingenuity, stealth, and precise execution. Japanese officers, trained in tradition and discipline, confronted the uncomfortable truth that confidence and numbers alone could not guarantee security. Fear and uncertainty became as powerful a weapon as any torpedo, reshaping decision-making and strategy in profound ways. For the Allied forces, these operations were a testament to the convergence of technology, intelligence, and human skill.